Well, hello everyone. I want to welcome you to the 2023 World Dairy Expo and this afternoon's seminar. Thank you for attending. The importance of mental health in agriculture will be our topic. It's been sponsored by the DATCAP Wisconsin Farm Center. That's the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, has a Wisconsin Farm Center. We have some literature on the table as you leave if you haven't picked that up yet. Our presenter today is Ted Matthews, the Director of Minnesota Rural Mental Health. Farming is getting far more complex, and it's more important than ever that farmers take care of themselves. For the last 30 years, Ted Matthews has been addressing the importance of mental health and helping farm families reach their business and personal goals. The program ensures rural residents who are known for their independence and a strong sense of pride have access to and can participate in programs that provide assistance as they face complicated personal challenges such as financial stress, depression, family conflicts, and more. I'm sure many of you in the room who are farming can relate to that. Dedicated to working around the clock to help those involved in agriculture and struggling with stress, Ted Matthews' credentials include experience in crisis intervention, family mediation, individual, family, and group therapy, outreach training, administration, public speaking, domestic abuse, and compulsive gambling. In 1993, Ted was the Director of Mental Health for the Federal Emergency Management Agency's flood response in Minnesota. This led to the creation of the Rural Mental Health Outreach Program, which is currently operated through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And by the way, on a personal note, myself working at Department of Ag Farm Center, we now have added in the last few years some farmer wellness services, and Ted and his colleague Monica McConkey were very helpful to us in guiding us and giving us some advice how to do that with their years of experience working with farmers, so much appreciative. Today's training has been accredited by the American Registry of Professional Animal Scientists and Dairy Advance for up to 1.00 CE credits. Dairy Advance is an online continuing education resource designed to allow dairy farmers and agribusiness professionals the ability to formally track and demonstrate our promise of continual improvement and lifelong learning as dairy professionals. Through Dairy Advance, you can find, track, and report your continuing education. At the end of the training, we will share more and ask that you complete your attendance validation form to secure your credits. Lastly, I think this is the very first time World Dairy Expo has had an official seminar on this topic, so we really appreciate your coming, and thank you to Dairy Expo for doing so. At this time, I would like to ask everyone to please silence their cell phones, and I welcome Ted Matthews. Thank you.
Hi. You know, I've been working with farmers since 1993, and the first thing I learned is that, and this is going to shock all of you, farmers don't call psychologists. Now, when I was working for FEMA, I had worked, we had the program going for a little over a year, and a farm business management instructor and an extension agent called me and said, did I work with farmers? And I said, well, of course we work with farmers. We work with everybody. And then I looked on our books, and in over a year, the state of Minnesota had a total of 0 farmers call. So I realized that maybe farmers don't call psychologists. So what we did is we went about finding ways to work with farmers so they would understand what we do and stop getting worried about that word psychologist. What I tell everyone is never call me that. Just simply say, let's call Ted. He knows more about this than I do. And in all the years that I've been doing this, not one person has walked into my office and said, could I see your credentials? Which kind of sucks because I went to school for a long time to get credentials and nobody cared. What they want to know is, can I help them or can't I? Do I know what I'm talking about? Do I understand farmers? Do I understand farm life? So that's what the premise was. Now, in working with farmers, a lot of things have truly changed. When I started working with farmers a little over 30 years ago, the divorce rate on farms was much lower than in town. Now it's the same. Know why? Women. Women on the farm have a different role than they used to have. Women on the farm, their job was raise little farmers, do everything inside the home. That was their role. And it was their role for thousands of years. So it was pretty basic, everybody knew. Well, now what? What do women do now that they didn't do before? A couple things. One, they work off the farm. And why do they work off the farm? Health insurance and pay down the debt. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, nothing except the fact that when they get home, what's the focus? The farm, the farmer. What about her? What about the stresses she has? What about the things that she goes through every day? And who does the dishes now? Is it still supposed to be her after she's already worked in town and so on? Second thing, and this is just as important, is women now do the books on farms. And when women do the books, what do they have now that they didn't have back in the day? An opinion. Now they say, why do we need to get a John Deere? Why can't we wait till next year? Why can't we this? Why can't we that? Why don't we do this? And two heads are better than one. The problem is they haven't learned that from their ancestors because that's not how it was done. So it's new. So it creates a lot of problems because of the communication. Communication is an incredibly important part of all family life. And now it's far more important, and yet we have far less time. So how do we communicate? How do we listen? When people talk about communicating, they oftentimes refer to the idea of, I'm going to say something, and I want you to hear it. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, what they're looking at is, as soon as you get done, I have things I want to say too, and we don't hear each other. We simply wait until it's our turn, if we even wait. Communication is super important, but listening is vital, or communication doesn't exist. If I don't hear what you're saying, it doesn't matter. So working on listening skills becomes really important. This is going to shock you all, but men and women don't think alike. Men and women don't communicate alike. And so if we're going to hear each other, we need to understand those differences without judgment. I'm different than you, not better, not worse, simply different. I think differently than you do, and that becomes really, really important. Now, when divorces on farms happen, one of the things that is one of the most taboo subjects on the planet is prenups. And I deal with that, and nobody wants to hear about that. And why doesn't anyone want to talk about that? Well, number one, anybody in this room who's married get married thinking, and eventually we'll get divorced? We get married assuming we're going to be married forever, don't we? And so how would you feel as a woman or a man in the same situation? How would you feel if somebody said, will you marry me and sign a prenup? How'd that sound? And so we have difficulty and talking about those things and talking through those things. Are there ways to have it be fair and maintain the family farm? Now, I've talked about the male and the female, the couple to be. Here's the other kicker that people don't talk about much, but is really important. What about the family of the son or daughter that's looking at, well, if they get divorced, she gets half the farm. If she gets half the farm, we can't farm. And they think through all those things without ever talking about them because they're afraid to talk about them. It's hard to talk about that stuff. But if you don't, bad things happen. There's no reason to not bring up all those topics as long as you don't have an agenda to say this is what the end has to be. So communicating those things becomes really, really important. Now, something else I really like to talk about is anger. Now, I want you all to remember this. If you don't remember anything else that I say today, remember this. Anger by itself does not exist. Does not exist. Why is that important? Because we constantly we get angry, and we say, I'm not going to do that anymore. I promise, I will never say that again. Then we do. Why? Why do we repeat it? Because anger by itself does not exist. What emotion triggers that emotion? What emotion triggers that anger? Now, I also want you to remember another thing. When you're angry, drop your IQ 50 points. None of us in this room are smart enough to do that. Have you ever noticed that when you're angry, 4-letter words are pretty popular, but 8-letter words never come out of your mouth? So anger drops our IQ, and we say things that we don't want to say. And guess what? If I'm angry with someone and I scream out something to them, I forget it 5 minutes later. Do they? Do they forget it? Nope. So our anger can create problems with other people and we don't even know why, and sometimes they don't even know why, but they do remember those things. Anger is a huge part of our daily life, and we need to understand how that process works. How many times have you actually been in an argument with somebody where at the end you said, oh, thank goodness we've resolved that? So why do it? Why continue to do it? The safe thing to do is say, let's talk about this tomorrow or tonight. But make sure you have a time to do that. Don't just say, let's talk about this some other time. Have a time. Because in general, one gender, when there's a big argument, one gender will walk out of the room much faster than the other gender. Which one do you think it is? Who walks out? The man. And who walks right behind him saying, I'm not done with you yet? So when we communicate and when we look at anger, we need to understand that anger by itself doesn't exist. And let me show you something on the board. Black better? Well, the first thing I know that all of you are thinking is, I know you went to art school. All right. When we look at anger, our assumption is we just get angry. Well, that's not true. When, as an example, harvest time comes, and we're in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th day of harvest, do you think we wake up here? I'll use, they don't have black, but brown probably close. Okay. Do you think we start here? The healthiest people alive when they wake up in the morning are about between 2 and 3. The healthiest people, the happiest people. We have things go on in our life. So we do have that factor in us all the time. Now, the biggest number to always remember is right here. The reason we always, how many of you have said in this room, and I actually know the answer, all of you, have said, I'm not going to do that again, and then we do. We get mad, we explode, we say, oh, I shouldn't have done that, shouldn't have said that, but I'm not going to do it again. And we mean it when we say it, so why do we do it again? And we all do. Because 10, which is the explosion, is not the important number. 8 is. Because we justify our anger. Once we justify our anger, we're going to explode. It's just a matter of will we do it right this second or in a couple minutes, but we will explode, guaranteed, absolute. We will explode. So we need to know that we're escalating so we can figure out a way to de-escalate. And why should we do that? Because it's in our best interest. Because what we do when we're angry, people remember. This is going to shock all of you too. When do you suppose I get the most calls for marriage counseling? Right after harvest. And why do you suppose that is? Can you justify your anger because you're in a hurry, you've got a lot of things to do, blah, 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 blah? Can you? Does the other person hear that and say, okay, yep, the first time, maybe the 5th time, but maybe not the 10th time? Because we keep saying we're sorry, we keep repeating it, and then we don't have the trust. Trust is incredibly important. Trust is absolutely a fundamental thing in all relationships, and if we don't have it, don't bother. Just don't bother. Because if you don't trust the person you're talking to, things good will not happen. We have to trust. And in relationships with women working off the farm and having far less time to talk, that creates problems in itself because we all need to talk to somebody. We all need to have friends somewhere. And so that pulls apart more and more and more. So communication is not easy. It takes work. What I do when I do marriage counseling is I don't care if they've been married for 45 years or 45 minutes. If they're in my office for marriage counseling, I give them a task. I tell them they have to talk to each other for 15 minutes a day for 7 days in a row, and they can't talk about the kids or work. Anything else, just not their kids or work. And in all the years I've done that, nobody has ever done it. Now you have to remember, people who come into my office already have problems in their marriage. So for all of you who are thinking, hey, I talked to them, then you're not in my office either. But never once have they been able to do it for 7 days, talk 15 minutes a day for 7 days. But here's some of the things I've heard. Guys will say, well, I live 45 minutes away from your office. Does it count for 3 days if I talk to her on the way home? And what is that implying? It's implying it's a punishment, isn't it? So what I'm doing to him is punishing him because he has to talk to his wife for 15 minutes a day for 7 days in a row. if that's how we're looking at it, not going to be very successful. It's hard. Something else I wanted to talk to you about is all of the people in this room have either been adolescents or have had adolescence. And I like to talk about adolescence a little bit because as parents, we forget that we were adolescents. That we didn't think the way we do now. And we act like we don't remember what it was like to be adolescents. Bobby or Susie comes home and says, "Can I go to a party at so-and-so's house?" And what do we ask as parents? Is there going to be drinking there? Are there going to be boys or girls there, depending on gender? Going to be drugs there? Now, I want you guys all to go back to your adolescence and tell me the truth. Did you tell the truth to your parents? No. Why not? Because you're adolescents. That's why not. Not because you're bad guys, not because you're doing something bad. It's because you're adolescents. So who's responsible? The adult. Stop trying to be equal to your children as adolescents because they don't know. Adolescents think they know everything because when they're 13, they figure they've got it figured out. And when they're 14, they realize they didn't. But now that they're 14, they realize they were dumb when they were 13, but now they're 14 and they know more. And 15 and 16. Now, when we become adults, we repeat things over and over. We become adults. We get to see, we get to understand, we get to know. Remember, our kids are kids. They're not being evil, but if we try to talk to them like they're equals in those situations, then we're both adolescents. Somebody needs to be responsible. Somebody needs to say, no, you're not going to that party. Or I'm going to call the parents' house. Or whatever, because you're the responsible ones. You're the adults. You're not equal. Too far, too many let those things go by trying to be helpful. And as long as we're talking about kids, how many of you did chores when you were growing up? How many of you have expectations of your kids doing chores, or do you think they're much better off because they don't have to do all the things you had to do? Tricky question, isn't it? I want you to understand something about work ethic. Work ethic comes from work. Work ethic is not a philosophy. Work ethic is work. And we learn our work ethic by working. And if we have no expectations of our kids doing things, chores and so on, then how can we expect them to grow up and say, okay, now that I'm X age, I'm going to start working hard and I'm going to start doing this and I'm going to start doing that? It's like, excuse me, it's not how it works. Work ethic comes from work. So we need to have expectations of our kids doing things, doing chores, being responsible. Because then they grow up to do those things as adults. Again, as adults, we are responsible for those kinds of things. They're not. They're kids. They're young. Now, I know I'm jumping around a lot, but that's partly because I have an hour to tell you everything I know. I could use an hour and 15 minutes probably. So, I want to throw out as many little ideas as I can with you, and I passed out the brochures. If you notice, I'm not going to go through that brochure because all of you can read. So if you want to read it, and if you don't, don't. Now, how many of you know what an extrovert is? Everybody? And what an introvert is? Okay. Communication. All right. The mean is just simply the middle. So, I'm going to just go around and ask a few people, extrovert, introvert, and how far over. This being the middle, this being way to the extreme. How far over? Ooh. Okay. Introvert, extrovert. I'll get to you next. Now you. Introvert, far over, 20, 10. Are you trying to tell me that? 10? Okay. You? Yes. For the expert. Let's get 4 or 5 more. How about you? How far over? 20? Oh, introvert. Lady, you hear? You say 20? How about you? Introvert. Somewhere in here? Just a couple more. Ladies? You're all introverts? 15? All 3 of you? Well, if you're introverts, you don't talk about that much, do you? All right. Now I could go around the whole room, fill up the board. Why is it important to understand introvert, extrovert? Because how we communicate dictates where we are. And I would guess that not one person that answered that question, except perhaps this one, is right. We aren't that introverted or extroverted. Most of us, and the healthiest place to be, is here because if I'm talking to an introvert, a true introvert, and I'm a true extrovert, communication is almost impossible. Almost impossible. We don't think alike. But the truth is, most of us, I just about guarantee that there's not one person in this room that's not at least in this category. These extremes are not true. And thank goodness, because communication comes from understanding, and understanding comes from, if we're an extrovert, we think one way. If we're an introvert, we think another way. So understanding that becomes helpful. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about human emotion. Now, our society tries to simplify all our human emotions. We're right, we're wrong, it's good, it's bad, it's left, it's right. Human emotion, to me, is the most complex thing in the universe. And we try to simplify it and break it down into such basic, simple terms. I am far too complicated for that. Any of you in here know what a flat affect means? We're dead. Okay? That's what a flat affect is. The healthiest people alive have emotions like this. The healthiest people alive. Now, what that means is we have good days and we have bad days for absolutely no reason. None. Now, you all have heard of bipolar, right? You know what that is. It's like this. I get asked all the time, bipolar people, why do they not take their medications? Because if they take their medications, they're far closer like this. They're still not, but they're much closer. So why don't they take their medications? Because none of us feel this high. None of us. And what they miss is this, and what they forget is this. Our human emotions swing, all of us. Every one of us has looked in the mirror one day and said, yeah, and then looked in the next day and gone, ugh. Why? Our moods swing. We feel differently. And that's the healthiest of us. So understand, human emotion is incredibly complex. And to understand myself, I have to look at the whole picture, which is a pretty broad picture. We're constantly barraged with what we're supposed to think and how we're supposed to think. Constant. When we're born, what do? They put us in a blue blanket if we're a boy, a pink blanket if we're a girl, and immediately they've separated us. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there's not a baby that was born that gets it and says, oh, I must be a boy. So we separate them, and when we separate them, what do people do when they come to talk? They talk to the little girl one way, the little boy another. If a little boy skins his knee, toughen up. A little girl skins her knee, we put her on her lap and coddle her. Is that logical? Well, it is to our society, but it isn't logical. A little boy can feel just as deeply as a little girl. And a little girl could be just as tough as a little boy. So who we are and what we are and why we are is personal. And we need to look in the mirror and see who we are. when I first started my practice a long time ago, I remember I would have people look in the mirror and I would say, "What do you see?" And I stopped doing it because almost every time I did that, they'd start to cry. So I stopped doing it. What they saw is something they didn't like. So taking care of myself, learning how I feel, learning who I am, is not as simple as, well, I'm living this life, aren't I? Not A, B, C, D. I'm far too complex. Every person in this room is far too complex for that. So we need to understand that. And that's the beauty of it, is we are complex. The difficulty of it is we are complex. Depends on where we're going with it. Now, when I work with farmers and I work with couples in farming, what I hear is two people talking on different levels like they're from a different planet. Now, again, remember, people don't come into my office and say, you know, our relationship is so good, we thought we'd share that with you. Matter of fact, if they ever did, I wouldn't have a clue what to do. So, when people come in, they don't have a clue what they're so busy with their hurt and anger and frustration that they don't know how to communicate with each other. And so they have to go back to the basics. And as usual, I'm running out of time. I only have a half hour left, or 25 minutes. So I will move along with that one just to say, when you communicate with your boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, kids, remember, we're all different. Hear what they say. Don't have to agree to hear. I have a right to my opinion. And if it is not your opinion, they have a right to theirs too. We confuse that all the time. My wife taught English forever. And when I was in high school, I played football, hockey, ran track, played baseball, and the only thing I liked about school was going to play sports and girls. And the idea of having to go into the classroom drove me crazy. My wife, when she was 4 years old, would have these pretend people in front of her and start teaching them. Now, if somebody when I was in high school would have said, "You're going to marry an English teacher someday," I'd have decked them. An English teacher? Of all things in the world, what was at the bottom of my list? English teacher. Now, did I find out that we are so much alike? No. My wife's true philosophy, and I have said that to her when she was in the audience with me, so don't worry, she knows I say this about her all the time. Her true philosophy is, why say in 5 words what you can say in 5,000? She can call me on the phone and start talking, and I'll say, "Honey, I have a client in here, I have to go." And she can't say, "Okay." It is not possible for her to just say, "Okay." Not possible. She has to say, "I'm really sorry I interrupted you. I know I shouldn't have interrupted you, and I won't do that again, and please forgive me." And I'm thinking, just shut up, because I need to talk to the people that are in my office. And she can't do it. Now, I've told her that, and does that change it? No. Would she like to change it? Yeah, she always says she would. But it's who she is. So she likes to talk. And does that make a difference in our relationship? Well, of course it does. It's kind of difficult to stay focused on somebody that can talk about a plant for 45 minutes that I don't even care about. So it's hard for me to listen. But Do we have a good relationship? Absolutely, an awesome relationship. We get along great. Because of one word, and you never, never, never want to forget that word, respect. I respect her, she respects me. We do not agree on a lot of things. When I get home, sometimes she'll say to me, "Did you see that the mums are up?" And I will say, "Nope." But then I'll go out and look at them because it's important to her. And I know it's important to her. And she knows it's not important to me. But I respect her. I respect what she believes. So we don't have to be clones. We do not have to. When we communicate, oftentimes she will tell me about something that I really don't care. She loves to garden, as an example. Loves to garden. And my thought is, we can go down to the store and buy that, can't we? Now, does that change her opinion? Not one iota. Not one iota. So, do I till the ground for her to plant? Absolutely. Do I want to? Absolutely not. Does she know that? Absolutely not. She knows, but she doesn't care. Now, what I'm trying to convey is relationships are based on respect, and if we respect each other, we can work together. We don't have to be clones of each other. We do not have to have the same philosophies. We can work together because we respect each other. If you don't have respect and you're absolute clones of each other, you will not get along. So you need to demand respect from the people that you are with, because if you don't have it, you don't have a healthy relationship. Something else I do all the time is I say, be nice. And when I say that, what do you think people hear? What do you hear when I said that? What did you hear inside you? Be nice. What does that mean? I'm guessing that some of you thought, I am nice. And some of you thought, I could be nicer. How many of you thought, be nice to yourself? How many of you thought that? Now, if we're not nice to ourselves, how are we supposed to be nice to other people? Why are we so confused by that? It's amazing to me. We think if we're nice to other people, they'll be nice to us. It's not how it works. How it works is, if I'm nice to myself, I have the ability to be nice to other people. I can be a better father if I'm nice to myself. I can be a better husband. I can be a better wife. I can be a better mother. If I'm nice to myself, I can project nice things to other people. So when you think be nice to yourself. Isn't it ironic that it's a lot harder to be nice to ourselves than it is other people? How we judge things. One example I like to use is, when people go out, and poor folks, and you've all seen people coming into a town and don't have very good clothes and so on, and they may go to a church, and we're more than happy to help them, give them some food or some clothing or something, shelter maybe. And we're good about that, and we feel good about that charity. But how would we feel about ourselves? Would we condemn ourselves for being in that situation, but not somebody else? How does that work? Why am I more negative towards myself than I would be total strangers? Why would I give more breaks to people I don't even know than breaks to myself? Why? Why can't I be nice to me? Why can't I see that and say, I hope other people feel the same way? I lived in New York for a while, and when I lived in New York, I remember getting off the subway, and there was a guy that he had a sign and it said, please help me, I'm homeless. And I walked another half a block, and there was another sign, and it said, please help me, I'm homeless and I'm blind. And I walked another half a block, and there was a guy that, and this is a true story, by the way. And I walked another half a block, and there was a guy that said, please help me, I'm homeless, I'm blind, and I'm a veteran. And I was afraid to walk any further because we identify and we help, and they know, and were they being honest? Well, maybe one of the three of them was, but I doubt more than one of the three. Pretty hard to believe that they would be able to be blind and still know what the other person's sign said. So why do they do it? Because we care about them and we help them and we want to help them. We're nice people. So why don't we look in the mirror and say the same thing? Please help me. Please be nice to me. Please accept me for who I am. Be nice. So I'm at the point where I better start opening up for questions. That usually brings the quiet to the room, but I will ask you, any questions? Wow, I'm good. Every question you've ever had is answered. Yes? Well, agriculture people, there are groups of women that get together, and oftentimes it's based on, suicides or a loss of a spouse and so on. And a lot of times Zooms, if you look it up, you can find Zooms that have those kinds of things. But and I purposely didn't talk about suicide, and maybe I probably should on the farm, but that's one thing. I think that groups in rural areas and farm areas are super important because it's changed so much. Farming has changed drastically. I tell people all the time, the biggest change in farming over the last 5,000 years is women. It isn't the equipment, it's women. Because their role has totally changed. And right now, what weighs, as an example, more than 50 pounds on a farm? And if nothing weighs more than 50 pounds, why can't women farm? I mean, they even have machines for picking rock. Wish they'd had that when I was young. So things have changed, and women in agriculture, there will come a time when women will take over the farms because they can already. The only reason they aren't now is because of tradition. So getting together with other like-minded people is very important because especially in rural areas and on farms, we can feel so isolated. And that's where Zooms can really help because we don't have to congregate in the same spot. Well, if the problem sometimes is if my focus is suicide, and your focus is on stress, and of course there's stress in suicide, my focus is going to constantly come back to, let's talk about suicide. Let's talk about what happens and all those things. And this person might be saying, well, there's a lot of things that create stress, and that probably isn't going to work very well in a group. So with suicide, I think that can be a separate issue, and it probably should be. And stress, anxiety, depression. Here's something else I want you all to remember. If stress, anxiety, and depression was defined, like we always like to define it, then explain to me why there are 100,000 books written on stress, anxiety, and depression. If it can just be defined, we should only need one book. Why are there thousands, hundreds of thousands of books on it? Because we are all unique. Because one book on stress might mean nothing to me, even though it's talking about stress. But it doesn't talk about mine, doesn't talk about me, doesn't talk about my feelings, my needs, my wants. So remember that. There's a reason there's all those books on stress, anxiety, and depression. We're all different. Yes? Well, demand respect because you deserve to be respected. You deserve that. And if you don't deserve that, then you have every right to say, explain to me why I don't deserve it. If you're in a relationship with somebody who says, I don't think you deserve my respect, why not? The problem oftentimes comes from that idea that because we're different, because we think differently, then one of us has to be right. And that's not true. We can think totally different and still both be right. And I have a right to my thoughts. It's not who talks the loudest or who's the toughest. It's I feel what I feel. I am who I am. I need what I need, and so do you. And so if we can respect each other with those things, we can have a healthy relationship. And if we don't demand it, and what I'm saying by demand is, if you don't respect me, where do we go? Are you assuming that everything you say is right, and then whatever I say is secondary? Which happens to be the case for some people, pretty sadly, but it is. So that's what I mean by demand. Any other questions? Yep.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm curious, have you ever had a farm that is willing to bring in an employee with some sort of mental problems, or willing to implement this type of topics into the farm for the employee?
Well, one of the problems with farms and farmers is most of them were never taught to be supervisors. So they don't really know how to deal with a lot of those things. And I can tell you for sure that there are tons of farms that would love to find anybody who's willing to work on their farm, and they don't have to have 150 IQ. So it would be to their advantage for a lot of them if they would indeed do that. But they don't have the tools or the skills to be able to bring them in, and that would be a great, great asset if someone would bring that to them. A great asset. Yes? Yeah, listen. listen to what they have to say and repeat back what they said. Prove to them that you heard them. Oftentimes, we hear somebody talk and then we respond and then they don't hear you saying that they heard what you said. And so repeat back what they say when they're saying it, and that will give them a sense of security, and they will also then feel more equal, because if you're coming in, like me as a psychologist, when I come in, they know that I am the guy, and so my job is to make sure that they feel comfortable enough to talk to me about the things that they want to, and they're sure not going to do that if I'm standing up here and I'm acting like they're down there. So show them that you hear them and that you care about what they said. Yes?
Any advice that you can give us to help manage social media phone how they are getting us?
Oh,
How do you use that? Technology is here to stay, right? So we need to work with that. But especially for our kids, I heard that that's why they make so many
well, that, oh, thank God I've got 4 minutes, I can cover that. In the first place, we have to remember that myself, when I was a youth, if you went by a baseball field, there were always kids on it. And during football season, there were always kids that got together and played football, and there were no adults there. You just did those things. And in school, they had intramural sports, and so if you weren't good enough to be a varsity player, you could play basketball on an intramural team and volleyball on an intramural team. Well, they don't have any of that anymore, and ironically, schools constantly talk about how important physical education is, and then they show no interest in having kids be physically active. Where I live, you can literally see the school from my house, and people take the bus to school. And it's you know, Hutchinson is not exactly, you know, it's 15,000 people, not exactly a big city, and yet everybody takes the bus. So what we've done is we've isolated, and phones, I've actually been in the mall where I watched 4 girls texting all at the same time. They weren't talking to each other. They were all texting either each other or other people around. So monitoring those kinds of things is important, but it's become like a life's blood for so many people. And you know, frankly, even for me, you know, I'm on the road a lot, and if it wasn't for cell phones and I can talk for hours and hours and hours while I'm going someplace to a lot of clients that I wouldn't be able to do that. So there are a lot of huge advantages to it. But there are also times when you need to put it down, because what I've seen is how incredibly rude people can be. Like you and I are talking and your phone rings and you stop talking to me and start talking to somebody else. That's rude. And we see that all the time. And so it's okay to say, you know, I have limitations on my acceptance of those things. And in my house and on my farm and with the people that I'm with, there are limitations to that. I think cell phones are an awesome tool, but I also think that it can be used way too much. Same thing with those stupid games that kids play in township. But then that's me too. So. Yes?
So, I have a question for you about whether or not you have a vision for the rural community. Obviously, we're all here because we're interested in mental health in ag community. How do we implement change in our communities and help our farm population work through these issues that we experience every single day? What does that look like?
Well, for one, I didn't talk about suicide, but that's a good time to bring that up. When we don't know what to do, we do nothing. That is how we are. When we don't know what to do, we do nothing. So what I recommend to everyone is know to do something. I don't care if it's call your clergy, have a plan. If a neighbor of yours goes to church every Sunday or Saturday and they miss 3 weeks in a row and they haven't missed ever, and you say, well, I know that maybe there's something wrong, and you don't do anything, then what happens? And the person, let's say the person commits suicide. Then you say, oh, I should have blah, 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 blah. So have a plan. Call the hotline, call the minister. Have an idea of who can I call, what can I do to get something like that done so I can move forward. Because if you don't, then you feel responsible for bad things that happen. And remember, if you find out that that guy was actually in the Bahamas for 3 weeks and you're a little embarrassed, well, okay, a little embarrassed or you saved a life. The price is not high enough. It's like it's okay to be a little embarrassed because maybe you saved a life. Have more of a concept of community. Have better relationships with, and I didn't even get into working with migrants, and that's a huge issue too, as far as migrants will come and work on farms, and the way they set that up oftentimes is horrible because they will, and I'm already over time, but just quickly, what they will do sometimes, and oftentimes, is they'll choose the one that speaks the best English, and they might be the worst worker. So they need to figure out who the best worker is, and they can always get that translated. But who's the best person for the job, not who speaks the best English. And if you don't do it that way, you're going to lose those employees because they're well aware of that. And when we talk about equality, don't say it, do it, be it. So, all right, thank you very much. I'm already over time, I'm sorry.